Hello everyone, and welcome back to Vet Care. In today's video, we are going to continue our journey in reproductive physiology by looking at the anatomy and physiology of the female reproductive tract. The female reproductive tract includes the ovaries, oviducts, uterus, cervix, vagina, and the external genitalia. Each part has a special role. The ovaries produce gametes, which are the eggs, and also secrete important hormones that control other parts of the reproductive tract. The oviducts provide the best environment for fertilization and also for the early development of the embryo before it attaches. The uterus is where sperm transport happens, early embryo growth takes place, and later the fetus attaches and develops. The cervix works like a barrier. It produces mucus during estrus and forms a tight cervical seal during pregnancy. The vagina acts as the organ for mating, and it also produces lubricating mucus when the animal is in heat. Now, if we look more closely, the female reproductive tract can be thought of as a series of tubes, like the oviduct, uterus, cervix, and vagina. All of these tubes have the same 4 layers. On the outside, there is the serosa, a protective covering. Just inside, we have the muscularis, which is made of smooth muscles that contract and help with movement. Beneath that is the submucosa, which contains blood vessels, nerves, and supporting tissues. Finally, on the innermost side, we have the mucosa, which is the secretory layer that produces fluids and has different types of cells in different regions. These layers together are important for moving gametes, transporting embryos, secreting fluids, and providing protection during mating and birth. The whole reproductive tract is covered by a membrane called the peritoneum, and from this develops the broad ligament. The broad ligament holds and suspends the ovaries, oviduct, uterus, cervix, and the upper vagina. It is also very important because it carries blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves to these organs. The broad ligament has 3 main parts. The first is the mesovarium, which supports the ovary and supplies it with blood vessels and nerves. It also connects the ovary to the uterus through the utero-ovarian ligament. The second part is the mesosalpinx, which supports the oviduct and helps to guide the egg into it after ovulation. In some species, like dogs, the mesosalpinx even forms a pouch around the ovary called the ovarian bursa. Finally, we have the mesometrium, which is the largest part. It supports the uterine horns and the body of the uterus, literally making the uterus hangs from the body wall. Now let's explore each part in more detail and connect its structure to its function. Let's get started with ovary. The ovary is a small, ovoid and dense structure that performs 2 very important jobs. First, it produces the female gametes called ova. Second, it works as a hormone-producing organ. The main hormones secreted are estrogen and progesterone. Now let's move into the structure of the ovary. On the outside, there is a connective tissue layer called the tunica albuginea, and this is covered by a single layer of cuboidal cells called the germinal epithelium. Beneath this lies the ovarian cortex, which is the functional zone of the ovary. This is where oocytes are stored, follicles develop, and also where we find the corpus luteum and the corpus albicans. The corpus luteum, also called the yellow body, is responsible for producing progesterone, which is vital to maintain pregnancy. When the corpus luteum regresses, it forms a white, scar-like structure known as the corpus albicans. At the center of the ovary we find the ovarian medulla, which contains blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerves, all supported by dense connective tissue. In mares, the ovary is different from other animals in a few ways. In most species, the cortex is on the outside and the medulla is on the inside, but in mares this is reversed, with the cortex inside and the medulla outside. Ovulation is also different. In other animals it happens at random spots on the ovary, while in mares it only takes place at one fixed place called the ovulation fossa. Another difference is seen during rectal palpation. In most species, both the follicles and the corpus luteum can be felt, but in mares only the follicles can be detected. The corpus luteum cannot be felt because it stays buried within the tissue instead of protruding outward. Let's talk about how follicles develop. Inside the ovarian cortex, follicles undergo a step-by-step process of development known as folliculogenesis. This is simply the journey of an immature follicle gradually becoming mature and ready for ovulation. It starts with primordial follicles, which are the most immature and microscopic, consisting of an oocyte surrounded by a single layer of flattened squamous cells. These can develop into primary follicles, where the oocyte is now surrounded by a single layer of cuboidal cells. Then they become secondary follicles, which have multiple layers of cells around the oocyte but still no cavity. Here, the oocyte is surrounded by a protective layer called the zona pellucida. The next stage is the antral or tertiary follicle, which now has a fluid-filled cavity called the antrum. These follicles can be seen on the surface of the ovary, and the largest, most dominant one is called the Graafian follicle. The antral follicle itself is organized into layers. On the outside, there is the theca externa, made of connective tissue that provides support. Beneath that is the theca interna, which produces androgens under the influence of luteinizing hormone. Inside that is the granulosa cell layer, separated by a thin basement membrane. This layer has receptors for follicle-stimulating hormone and is responsible for producing estrogen, inhibin, and follicular fluid. It also plays a critical role in oocyte maturation. When ovulation occurs, the follicle ruptures, small blood vessels break, and a temporary structure called the corpus hemorrhagicum or bloody bod is formed. The cells of the theca interna and granulosa then transform into luteal cells, forming the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone and maintains pregnancy. Eventually, when the cycle ends, this corpus luteum regresses and becomes the corpus albicans, a white scar-like structure inside the ovary. Now discuss oviduct. Oviduct, also known as the fallopian tube, is a tube-like structure that connects the ovary to the uterus and is the site where fertilization occurs. It's divided into three main sections. First, we have the infundibulum, which is located at the cranial or ovarian end of the oviduct. Structurally, it's funnel-shaped and lined with finger-like projections called fimbriae. These fimbriae increase the surface area and help the infundibulum move over the surface of the ovary during ovulation. This movement helps capture the newly released oocyte or egg and direct it into an opening called the ostium, which leads to the next part of the oviduct. In terms of size, the infundibulum ranges from 6 to 10 square centimeters in sheep, and up to 20 to 30 square centimeters in cattle. Next is the ampulla, which forms the middle portion of the oviduct. It connects the infundibulum to the isthmus. The ampulla has a larger diameter than the isthmus and contains fern-like mucosal folds lined with ciliated epithelium. This is the primary site of fertilization, where the sperm meets the egg. The cilia and muscle contractions help transport both the sperm and the oocyte toward each other. Moving on to the isthmus, this section connects the ampulla to the uterus. It has a smaller diameter, thicker muscular walls, and fewer mucosal folds compared to the ampulla. The isthmus plays an essential role in transporting the fertilized egg, now called a zygote, to the uterus. It also secretes fluids that support sperm function and help early embryonic development before the embryo enters the uterus. Finally, talk about an important structure called the uterotubal junction. This is where the oviduct meets the uterus. In cows, when estrogen levels are high, the uterotubal junction forms a kink, like a bend in a tube, that blocks the embryo from moving into the uterus too early. When estrogen levels drop, the kink straightens out, and the embryo can pass into the uterus. In swine, this junction acts as a barrier to sperm, helping to prevent too many sperm from reaching the egg and reducing the chances of polyspermy, which is when an egg is fertilized by more than one sperm. Next, discuss the uterus. Often referred to as the organ of pregnancy, is a muscular, hollow organ that connects the oviducts to the cervix. It is responsible for transporting sperm, supporting early embryo development, contributing to the formation of the placenta, and expelling the fetus during birth. Let's first understand the two main parts of the uterus, the uterine body and the uterine horns. The uterine horns are two tube-like structures that connect cranially to the isthmus of the oviduct. Caudally, they join together to form the uterine body, which then connects to the cervix. The length and development of these horns vary widely between species. For example, some animals have long uterine horns that provide more space for developing multiple embryos, while others have a large uterine body and short horns, suited for single offspring. Now, let's talk about the structure of the uterine wall. The uterus is made up of 3 layers. The outermost layer is called the perimetrium, or serosa, and is a thin, transparent membrane that protects the uterus. Beneath that is the myometrium, the thick, muscular middle layer made up of 2 muscle layers, an outer longitudinal layer and an inner circular layer. These muscle layers work together to create motility, or contraction, which is important for moving sperm, supporting pregnancy, and pushing the fetus out during birth. When estrogen levels are high, the myometrium stays firm and a little tight. You can even feel this firmness during a rectal exam in animals like cows. This firmness helps move sperm inside the uterus. When progesterone levels go up, the muscle relaxes and becomes soft. This relaxed state is perfect for the embryo to attach and grow. And during birth, the muscle works hard, making strong contractions to push the baby and placenta out. The inner layer of the uterus is called the endometrium, which includes the mucosa and submucosa. This layer contains uterine glands that develop under the influence of estrogen and become fully functional under progesterone. These glands secrete nutrients that support sperm viability and embryo development in the early stages. A very important function of the endometrium is the production of prostaglandin, PGF2-alpha. If the animal is not pregnant, this hormone causes the corpus luteum to regress, a process called luteolysis, which helps restart the estrous cycle. We'll cover that more in detail in a future video. The appearance of the endometrium also varies across species. In ruminants like cows and ewes, the endometrium has caruncles, small, non-glandular, raised areas that become the maternal part of the placenta during pregnancy. In contrast, sows and mares don't have caruncles. Instead, their endometrium is filled with folds, which create surface area for placenta attachment. Let's discuss the 3 main types of uteri in mammals. First is the bicornuate uterus, which is common in domestic animals. This type of uterus has 2 horns and a small uterine body, all connecting to a single cervix. The length of the uterine horns varies depending on how much the paramesonephric ducts have fused. Paramesonephric ducts, also called Mullerian ducts. These are paired tubes present in the early embryo that develop into important parts of the female reproductive system. During fetal development, these 2 ducts usually come together and fuse in the middle to form the uterus. The degree to which they fuse determines the shape and size of the uterus body and uterine horns. For example, in mares, where there is a high degree of fusion, the horns are short, and the body is large. In cows, ewes, and goats, the fusion is moderate, so the horns are of intermediate length. In sows, bitches, and queens, where there is little fusion, the uterine horns are long, and the body is quite small. Next, we have the duplex uterus. This type of uterus has 2 separate uterine horns, each with its own cervical canal. There are 2 forms of the duplex uterus. The first is found in marsupials like the opossum. In this case, the female has a single vaginal opening to the outside, but internally, the tract splits into 2 vaginas and 2 cervices. Interestingly, male possums have a forked penis, which allows them to deposit semen into both sides of the reproductive tract at the same time. The second type is found in rabbits. They also have 2 uterine horns and 2 cervices, but only 1 vagina. This structure allows researchers to inseminate one horn with semen from one male, and the other with semen from a different male, producing offspring with different genetics. This makes rabbits excellent models for reproductive studies, since sperm or embryos don't migrate between the two horns. The third type is the simplex uterus, which is found in primates, including humans. This uterus has a single uterine body and no horns, as the paramesonephric ducts are almost completely fused during development. Next we have cervix. The cervix is thick and firm, and it has three main jobs. It helps with lubrication, it flushes out unwanted materials, and it acts as a strong barrier during pregnancy to protect the uterus. The cervix's shape and structure can be quite different depending on the animal. In cows and sheep, the cervix has several rings that fit together like interlocking fingers. In pigs, the rings are very tight, so the boar's penis has a special corkscrew shape that helps it lock in during mating. Horses have a cervix with loose folds that stick out into the vagina, and these folds become soft when the mare is in heat. In dogs, the cervix is smooth and has very few folds or rings. Similarly, in cats, the cervix is small, thick, and smooth. One important job of the cervix in cows and sheep is to make mucus during heat, which helps lubricate the vagina for mating and flushes out any unwanted materials like extra sperm or germs. This flushing helps keep the uterus safe from infections. Pigs and horses produce less mucus, but it still helps during mating. The amount and thickness of mucus change throughout the animal's heat cycle. During pregnancy, the hormone progesterone makes the mucus thick and sticky. This forms a strong, cervical seal, that closes the cervix tightly and keeps bacteria and other harmful stuff from getting into the uterus. If this seal breaks down, it can cause infections and even lead to abortion. Next we have vagina. The vagina's main job is to serve as the copulatory organ, that means it's where mating takes place. It also acts as the passage for urine to leave the body and serves as a birth canal during delivery. The vagina has a thin, not very strong muscular wall but a well-developed lining. Near the cervix, in the front part called the cranial vagina, the lining is made of column-shaped cells that produce lots of mucus. This mucus helps during mating and keeps things clean. In animals like cows, mares, and dogs, the cervix actually extends a little into the vagina, creating a small pocket called the fornix vagina. This is where the bull deposits sperm during natural mating. Not all animals have this pocket, for example, pigs do not have a fornix vagina. As you move toward the back part of the vagina, also called the vestibule, the lining changes to stratified squamous epithelium. It is special because it is shared by both the urinary and reproductive systems. Moving on to the vulva, this is the outside part of the female reproductive tract. It has two lips called labia that come together to help close off the vagina and keep out dirt and germs. The skin here has hair, sweat glands, and oil glands, and there are muscles called constrictor vulvae muscles inside that help keep the labia tightly closed. The area around the vulva and anus is called the perineum. Sometimes during birth, this area can tear if the baby is too big or not positioned right. Near the vulva is the clitoris, which is like the female version of the penis. It's made of erectile tissue and covered by skin. It has lots of nerve endings and becomes erect during heat because of high estrogen levels. If you found this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates from VetCare.